All right, so here is an example of a report that you can run for the time being, kind of ad hoc to get you through your performance queries that you're trying to answer. So the first thing I did was I looked at the the DC performance report to get a more detailed look at all the functions, and ran this period for 5 days. So that's kind of how this is set up right now, but it can be set up for different criteria, whether it be 7 days or even a day. It'll just take a little bit of formatting. But essentially, I left everything selected to capture all the data. I put in the time period, and once that populated, I exported that to Excel. From Excel, we brought it over, where we pasted it in this pre-formatted table. Now, when you go to reset this, you're just going to want to select a row, Control Shift down, over to the right, right click, and delete row. That way, when you import new data, you can start in the top cell, A2, the first one in the table, and go ahead and paste down the values there. Now what that's going to do is that's going to maintain the formulas that are set here, which do a couple things, and I'll just tell you about those real quick. First thing that we're doing is we're adjusting for Eastern Standard Time for the start time, the end time. We're also adding a formula to add a time function for this. So that comes in handy because you're not always going to want the full date and time stamp. You just might want the hour. So we add that in there. Same thing for the end time. For the day, we use a similar function called weekday to get that, and that'll give us a one-digit number that represents each day of the week, and it can be formatted so it'll bring up the days that you have referenced, and it does it in calendar format, so you always see that, but this formatting is set so you don't have to worry about it. Next thing we did was we looked at some of the time to get that in some kind of summary format that would be useful to you. So ours is a little bit unconventional in that we are accounting for things like lunchtime when that's not paid, if I'm understanding that correctly. So we normally wouldn't want to account for lunchtime. That probably shouldn't be in here. Same thing with the criteria that we have selected. It would probably be more something like exception time, indirect time, production time, the break time, and then the unpaid break. If that's how lunch is, that wouldn't be included in this. But for the time being, that's included with its own category, just so you can get some accurate information. Last one we did over here is a facility summary. So since we have a couple different codes for the same building, we group those together so that way you can get your summaries per building without having to do any kind of crazy calculations to include SV2, SD2, or SV3, SDC, and then I grouped all of the West Coast together just for simplicity. Okay, so once that's updated, that's saved as a table. When it's saved as a table, when you go over here to your dashboard, you're going to just want to hit Alt F5. So Alt F5 to update. And another thing with that is a lot of these are locked, so when you update it, the formatting is going to stay the same. If you didn't do that when you started filtering, all of this formatting would change and it would become hard to read and you would have to start all over again. So that's one setting that can get changed easily, and it's a pain when it's not corrected. But for the example, and I think the other question that came up about a replenishment function, I'll show you how you could use this just to do one export and one copy paste over, and then kind of drill down to what you want to see. So we'll do that example here. And actually, before we get into that, I'll just show you a couple of these other summaries that I just included. So I took a total hours recorded in EEC. So the total tracked hours of EEC for the entire network. That's coming up right here. That doesn't include people that didn't get on the clock, like a material handler or anybody that is not using the gun or logging in. But right now for the network, we're looking at 24,000 hours. So when we divide that by 40 hours for the week, we got approximately 624 people in EEC functions. All right. Now breaking that down, I did a couple summaries here that might be of value. So we got a time gap by building. And here we grouped SV2, SD2, same with these, and we did a comparison. So it looks like right now, biggest amount of time gap is at SV2/SD2. They account for 58% of all time gaps in the network. Another interesting one is looking at average units per hour per building, and then approximate users per facility. And you can see the ratio at each is pretty interesting. So the West Coast, when we group those together, their users versus their units per hour, that difference is really good. So you can see some efficiencies here. SV4 is interesting. It's kind of 1 for 1. And then you can see here a little bit different story, but again, different buildings, so different factors play into that. But again, that is counting our users per facility, and also comparing that to our output per facility. This right here is total hours spent in function. And what you can do here with these buttons, these are called slicers. If you want to just narrow it down to one building, say you wanted to look at just SD2 and SV2, you would click one and you would hold Control, click another one, and then that's going to bring you up both. And you can see it looks like 33% of the time was spent picking, and let's see, we got cycle count in there at 7-8%. And another thing you can do too is you can always filter out the top 10 functions, but for now I think it's good to just leave them all in there. You just have to match up the colors. And we could do the same thing if we looked at, let's see, SV4. So SV4, you can see we spent a lot of time picking, 50% of the time. And then you can see our other breakdown, pallet build 15%, but it gives you some cool insights there. And then when you want to just bring them all back, just select them all by holding Control. And then you got your network selected again. Same applies for these buttons and slicers over here. So if you just want to look at a certain function, a certain job, or a certain user, then you would do the same. So for that example in the first email, what was his name? Marcus? Marcus Williams 2. So if we wanted to check him out, right, we could just hit Marcus Williams 2, bring it up, and look at what he did for the week. So we're looking at, and this will add them both together, right? And if you wanted to stack them, so both functions were added together. One, we'd have to know the unit of measure and how it's being measured for productivity. So some are cartons, some pallets, etc. It looks like replenishment is actually going to be maybe a container, which is kind of telling you how many locations they went to, how many replens they did. But if we want to find out more, once you do your sort right there, you can just click into the day in question, double click it, and that's going to bring up all the transactions. So if we look at Marcus on this day, this was May 31st. He has, let's see, yeah, so this is internal replenishment by container. So I'm assuming that is how we're going to measure that, or that's how it's being measured now perhaps. And then it gives you a total quantity. We're not seeing any pallets show up for him. Maybe likely because he's not replanning full pallets, so it's probably just counting cartons on that. All right, but that basically gives you that, and you can do that for anybody. And those sheets, you can always just delete them when you're done with them. It's not going to hurt anything. And again, when you're ready to get everybody back, you can click the ones you want, or you can click them all at the same time. That's basically how that works. All right, so hopefully that's helpful for the time being, and I figured it would be easier just to talk about it than to try to write it all out. But yeah, feel free to hit me up anytime to walk through it. Again, when you do your export, right, you're going to want to delete everything except for the first couple rows, and then paste it in starting in A2, and then that'll save you from having to rewrite a bunch of formulas to get your summaries. All right, and that's it. Thank you guys, and talk to you soon.